Alright, boys and girls, Ken Jordan, update time. As you may have known, I've had some weird things happening in my personal life. I was unfortunately attacked by an anomalous being. To me, it looked like a shadow person with a knife. I managed to survive that with only a small injury, a small cut to the leg. It was not of consequence, didn't even need to be stitched up. If that was real and not some form of mental projection, I do not know. And I'm probably never going to know, and that is part of what real life has in store for all of us. I saw it happening at the time, I recall it as if it happened. I cannot prove to anyone else that this did happen. There's no pictures of it, there's no video of it. I don't sit around videotaping myself most of the time. I also, a few days later, lost approximately 3 hours, possibly a little over 3 hours. I had gone outside to investigate some sounds. At that location, I was well and truly snowed in. There was a lot of snow on the ground. Then after that, bit of missing time by several days, 2 deer just trumped out of the woods, hopped a fence between place where I was staying and the neighbors, a good way away from the front door. Walked up to the front door. These were not old deer, but they just laid down and apparently died right in front of my door. And there were 2 of them, not one. There were no marks on them. There were no blood trails. They just walked up and died, which, if you're paying attention, means multiple things going on. There are a lot of ways of killing something without leaving a mark. There are fewer ways of getting them to walk from point A to point B and then dying. This is not impossible. There are certain devices that the government has, and we're not even talking the spooky deep government, we're talking just a regular government, CIA, NSA. There are devices they have that could potentially cause something like this to happen, but why bring them into play? I took nearly 2.5 days to dig myself out. Thankfully, one of the neighbors had some heavy equipment, where I was staying, and had plowed right to the end of the driveway, but this is still an 1/8 of a mile long driveway. I think I can share that I have a 4x4, so I was able to dig out just enough to get myself out. It did take 2 days. Thankfully, there was no snow. Yes, my back is still sore from this. Right now, the location I'm at is actually a safe house that was provided to me by my former bosses. I know, I didn't figure that was going to be what happened either. I contacted a few of them to say, hey guys, what the bloody hell is going on with the threats, the attacks, the things going on like this right now? And what they told me was very different than what I had assumed. I kind of figured they were just going to shut me up, and really was baffled as to why I wasn't just waking up under a hail of bullets or, finding polonium in my soup. I know why I'm not finding polonium in my soup. I didn't let anybody touch my food. But that being what I was going in with, this is my thought when I was talking to them, and I went to Newman and said, hey Newman, okay, what the heck? Okay, before you get after me, Newman is not his real name. This was the person directly over me just before I left my old position. He's fairly high up in the organization. I had been there for 30 years. I was not the lowest man on the totem pole. He is called Newman, not because of the character from Seinfeld, but because he looks like kind of like Paul Newman did during certain parts of his life. This is in that movie star to human, regular person way that we do, where it's like a little bit around the fringes. He might seem slightly like that to some people part of the time in the right light, that kind of thing. But it's just a nickname. It was a nickname culture. I was referred to as Cleaver, if that means anything to anybody. And, you would think that would have to do with chopping things up, but no, not at all. You want the secret on that, you've got to wait. Okay, so, Newman, just flat, I told him all this, and it's like, hey Cleaver, this is not us. We're not doing this. And more than that, we've had some weird shit going down here as well, and a lot of our personnel have been being hit with certain things. Let's get you out of the field. We're going to bring you in. Have you work on this? I've said, well, I've got this project going on. I just released the other things. He of course said, well, wow, you appear to have 7 views on these things at this point. We're really scared. This is quite clearly going to be the big thing that takes us all down, because being a sarcastic asshole is the way that Newman rolls most of the time, and it is pretty funny, actually. But basically, after we talked for a while, he said, you know what, just do it. Try not to do anything that we'll have to arrest you for, because until everything falls apart, those old rules are still going to apply. But other than that, we'll give you some backup. So they put me in this tiny hellhole of a house. It is a standalone, so at least I don't have neighbors. It is not large. It is not well insulated. It is in a cold part of the country, and I do have a nice big yard, but I can access my funds again. So at least there's that. And I'm able to put this stuff up myself, which is better than I thought. I was trying to arrange for someone else to do downloading for me, and that was not going as easily as you might assume. Mainly because, quite frankly, you're never supposed to contact anybody that you knew in real life. There is clearly, that thing where if you're going to contact the people you believe are trying to kill you, the rules don't necessarily always apply. You're dealing with a totally different set of rules at that point, and it is an incredibly stupid thing to do most of the time. I mean, the only reason I was willing to do that was the raw fact that whoever is after me, and apparently us, my co-workers, my old co-workers, and myself, they are fully aware of where I've been, of where I'm going. One thing here, I am monitored 24/7, so if anything goes on, it should show up on camera. That does not mean that I will then have video for you on my YouTube website, because these are not my cameras, and quite frankly, it would be instantly classified information if anything of real note or interest comes up. I will try and get some actual footage going on if I can, at some point, if I will be allowed to put that out. I am uncertain as to the time on that kind of thing, what will be allowed. So, for right now, I am relatively safe, apparently. If it is my old bosses who are doing this, then I'm about to die at any moment here. So far, they haven't killed me. They've given me access to materials and things to actually make what I'm doing slightly easier. They do not seem intimidated at all by what I'm doing, because I am functioning on this side of the law, which, while they don't all love it, that's up to, that's up to me. That's, quite frankly, it's not a thing that you normally see happening. Most of the time, agents who work in the fields that I have worked don't give a lot of information to the public, mainly because of the problem that we've been talking about, and it's not a little problem. I know that a lot of people are like, oh, you keep harping on this thing, we're too stupid, we're too slow to understand that weird things can happen, and it's not that. It's that you have a wall in your heads. I have this wall in my head, and I've soaked in this stuff for 30 years. You can push this. You can do things to help push that back. But this is a part of being human, and for the most part, you're all human beings in that standard way. You're not, this sounds bad, but you're not special. You're as special as you make yourself be. You can be special, don't get me wrong. You can do some marvelous, incredible things if you want to, but you are a baseline human being, just like I am, just like most of the people at work are. Very few of you are active mutations of note. Now, some of you probably have some mutations, but they're small things and you may never notice them. And do you really notice if your T cells have a hook on the left-hand side? No. You would not know anything about that, nor would I. This is just not something that's ever going to come up, and yet it may actually make a difference to your life if those T cells, say, resist HIV that you would have been exposed to otherwise, or something like that. That is not an actual mutation. I just made that up off the top of my head, so I would not presume that any of you actually have that specific thing. That is pretty much where I am right now. I have gotten loads of information. Again, let me come at you with this caveat. Half of everything you get from intelligence operatives is bullshit. Half of it. I know I said something like that about psychics the other day. Good psychics are right about half the time. This is different than being filled with bullshit half the time. A good psychic will come up with information that is about like a coin toss, but don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that you can toss a coin and have the same information that you would be getting as you would from a good, trained psychic or remote viewer. If they're very good at this, you're going to get 50-50 information on whatever they tell you, but they're going to have access to information that you would not have had access to otherwise. This is where it gets really dicey, because you can have, say, group projects where you have 15 people working on a project together, and they all find remotely from one another without knowing what the others were doing, without even knowing what the initial target is. They will find the same basic information set, and all of them will be wrong. We do not know why exactly that happens, and quite clearly there was some form of psychic something or other going on there. But your information is still a coin toss. If they tell you that the serial murderer is at point A, there's a 50-50 chance they actually are in that house, or were when they had checked on the information. But in real life, 50-50 information at that level is more than worth checking out. One of the projects that I had been targeted with, that I had been assigned to when I was first learning basic remote viewing, and I am not a super psychic. I am not one of these people who have been conditioned for my entire career to do this. We all had to learn the basic tricks and techniques so we would understand what the other people were going through and why they worked the way that they worked. One of the first things I was given was a serial murder case. 2 girls had disappeared. I worked it down to a person of the name of Ward Wester, or W. Wester actually, I didn't get Ward at the time, W. Wester. I'd given a description of his car accurately, of the house, how to get there from the apartment complex that the 2 girls had disappeared from, that he knew them from school, from their school, that is where he encountered them originally, and I gave a description of the man, which was considered to be correct. But what had happened was that his name was not W. Wester, but was W. Weaver, Ward Weaver. The description that I gave of his car was correct. The description of the house was correct. I had said that one of the girls was being kept apparently alive in an underground room. She was buried in a drum underground and was not alive at all. That's a pretty big miss. Though she was underground, the other girl was still above ground, I thought also alive. She was also dead at that time. The description of the man, which was very similar, that I gave, came along for me with a very clear picture of the individual. Later on, when I saw the picture of Ward Weaver, he was not the man that I indeed had seen. Who I had seen was his father, also named Ward Weaver, also a killer. The description was considered accurate at the time. It was, indeed, I even had that the police were looking at him as a person of interest, which was true at the time. Not that this information was reported to the police, because that was not how our organization worked. It was simply attempting to find this. About a year later, 6 months later, it was like 6 months later, they came back to me and said, hey, you had some fairly accurate information. Here's where things had gone wrong, so that I could see how some of that information was correct. Now remember, when I started doing this, I knew nothing about what was going on. I was not tasked with finding the murderer of 2 girls out loud. I was basically told, what was said to me was, okay, in this envelope we have a target, find out information about it. And that's the information I came up with. So when I say it's a coin toss, you could look at that information and say, well, you had hit after hit after hit. There were some misses in there, there were some things that were a little off, particularly the name. Most people do not get names that well. I actually tried to read it off of his license. Psychically speaking, most people cannot clearly read psychically. So, it was considered actually, it was enough that they almost pulled me from what I was doing to go and work in those psychic fields because of that. It is something that I do pretty well, in getting that information, but I do not work with that kind of remote viewing psychic protocol all the time. I am not even considered to have a particularly high level of that skill. That level at that 50-50 ratio is considered what a normal person can do if they do things correctly. That's you, that's me, that's all of us. The thing there is that half the time, and I've done this myself as well, where you get similar information, it seems to be flowing the same way, you go through everything completely, and you are just wrong. Everything in it has nothing to do with what you're talking about at all, and we don't know why that happens. We do not understand why it happens. As I mentioned before, sometimes in large group projects, teams of remote viewers will all find the same incorrect data about the same target. And we do not know what's going on there. Something about that target may actually be leading them all to a different conclusion or location that's done in this similar fashion. My guess has always been that it is the difference between the way we look at information subconsciously and consciously. Sorry, I went off on a tangent here. But when I'm saying that information psychically is a coin toss, that's what I'm talking about. Is that it can be very good, high-level information, and it can also be just totally wrong, and you're probably not going to be able to tell which is which. Some of the very best psychics will push up into the 70 or even 80% range on being correct. When, those people, basically, they work in their own departments. We have complete divisions of people like that. But again, being wrong 20% of the time makes a big difference. In the intelligence world, if you're actually correct 50% of the time, you're considered a hotshot. And this is from any means. No matter how you get this information, if you can be right, actually it's the number of acceptable for data collection along those lines is much, much lower. And I'm not going to tell you how low because, quite frankly, it varies from department to department, but under 30% is not unheard of. But if you get 50%, you're doing pretty well. What happened when I came in the other day was that I got a large download of intelligence. I put up a warning about the inauguration. There was other information that I have been given both since then and at that time, which I did not put out there. A big portion of this is because, again, I can't verify any of it. What I would tell people here is that for the duration, from now on, stay away from crowds. A crowd is going to be anything more than 10 people. Now, you're not always going to be able to do this. If you live in a large city and can't get out of it because, well, finances are still a thing, then you're going to be around crowds every now and then. In that case, watch the mood of the crowd. Don't go to places where you know people are planning hijinks. Notice I did not say terrorism, hijinks. That is honestly, the biggest issue I'm seeing for tomorrow with the inauguration, if anything happens at all. And again, there have been arrests. There are people who were planning some things that are not going to be out on the street tomorrow. This may or may not be enough to stop everything from happening. Plus, you have the raw fact that some of the biggest dangers could come from people who were not running their mouths publicly, who are together with a small group of like-minded individuals who are planning things. There is a very, very large glut of psychic information coming in around this, particularly hitting things like Trump being assassinated, explosions in the city, particularly on the periphery of the city, so not at the inauguration itself, panic, chaos, things like this. This is even coming out in just normal mainstream sources. If you're reading between the lines, there are people who are very afraid this is going to happen. They have a sense that things like this could be going on, but again, this could also just be one of those cases where everybody is wrong. And this is what I mean by that coin toss situation. Is this going to be the truth of tomorrow, or is it just something that people are all picking up on in the group hive mind situation? Which one is actually going to be the case? My hope is that it will actually all go relatively smoothly, that we're not going to have any real problems. The smooth transition of power is a tradition in the United States for a reason. We're seeing a lot of things going on, people who are planning to not go to the inauguration who normally would, at a level that is unprecedented, even for an unliked or unlikable new president. Because remember, you still have to work with the man. So dissing him to his face, particularly somebody like a Donald Trump, who may well be a classical narcissist, you don't want to get on his bad side on the first day. And we have some 70 to 90 high-level people who are, for one reason or another, pulling back right now. By that same token, if anything were to happen tomorrow, who do you look at for the guilty parties? Well, the people who didn't show up due to the potential danger of the situation. Now, you and I, we are not those people. We're not held to those same standards. Again, we don't have to be there in the city. Is this being too cautious? Yeah, for most of us, it probably is. It's one of those things that we're just going to have to get used to and live with. 90% of the time, when you take a precaution, that precaution will not have any effect on the world, because the problem that you foresaw as potentially being there is not a real thing at that time. But we still lock our doors on our houses when we leave, even though nobody's breaking in. You still lock your car door. You still wear your seatbelt. You still don't eat at the Heart Attack Grill, because it could potentially be a problem at some point. Some of you eat at the Heart Attack Grill. I get this. I was just adding a little color. But the point is that the precautions we take are for the outlying things. So avoiding large crowds, avoiding situations where people have made threats of violence, if you know about them ahead of time. The vast majority of the time, when people make threats of violence, they do not mean them. They are not going to become violent. That's not what is actually planned. I'm pretty certain this is what we're looking at in this case tomorrow, but pretty certain means that you still have to take precautions. We all still need to be there. Now, I'm well away from that location. I'm, in fact, in an isolated position where none of this is going to be touching me. I have heard a few things, such as potential attacks on other locations at the same time for simple terrorist reasons. Again, most of the time that does not play out. I would still say be cautious in crowds, and remember, if something starts to happen, get out of the area. This can be hard if bombs are going off and guns are being fired, and you know to run during those points. But if you just feel weird, if things seem a little bit off, if cars are driving in the wrong place, or people are acting agitated, just leave. Just get out of there. It can't hurt to be a little bit more cautious for a while. That's about where I am at. I've got loads more information on this very same topic, and hopefully tomorrow evening I will be able to put out a thing saying, hey, look, nothing happened, or very little happened, and isn't this a wonderful thing? I was really, really worked up for a little bit there. still glad you didn't go, because that's what I'm going to be telling people, is that I'm glad you weren't there in the danger zone. Just like I'm, if there's a car accident, I'm glad if my friends aren't involved in it. And that's what I want for you too. That brings me to the end of this information now, honestly. Again, I have more things coming. We're probably going to have a lot more to talk about in the next few weeks. I'm going to try and hit the SCP things a little bit harder. They're part of what I'm trying to do with that. I have not been doing very well, and I apologize for that. Sorry about that. What we're going into is something that is far more certain than a coin flip. It's going to be far different than I can explain to you. I can give you little drips and drops of things as we go along. I will try to keep doing that. I will try to push things forward so that everybody can have a chance of making it. But anything that you do right now to prepare yourself, an exercise program, a martial arts class, learning to shoot, doing home prep so that you have extra food and water on hand, building up a bug-out bag so that you can travel. I need to really make sure I get a good one of those going, just in case I have to leave all my gear. If that happens here, you probably won't hear from me, possibly again, depending on what happens. For right now, I'm in a good, stable location. That probably sounded a little wrong, like I'm saying that I'm just going to stop doing this. I'm going to keep going for as long as I can on this. Glad to know the old bosses don't want me dead. Somebody out there is gunning for me. Those were obvious threats. What do I do about that? Well, hopefully not die and keep going. Okay, thanks everybody. Keep listening. I'll try and keep updating as I find out more information on different topics.